Thanks. Well, it's great to have this opportunity, and you're going to hear a number of voices speaking during this evening, and we're also going to use some video clips. So we're trying to pull in the experiences of the Pax Christi International family in the way we present this story tonight. And I'm just going to go over now into a screen share so that we can have some images to give some life and energy to our presentation. And that's just coming up now. Okay. Whoops, sorry. Let's get the technical hitches out of the way at the beginning. Great. So tonight we're going to look a little bit behind the scenes at the work of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, which is actually a project of Pax Christi International. And it began as a project in Rome in 2016 when we held a conference. And the purpose of that conference was to bring practitioners together with people from the Vatican to discuss the Catholic Church's history of and its commitment to nonviolence, and to start a process of urging Pope Francis to consider down the line writing an encyclical on nonviolence. We were delighted at that time to receive a very clear message from Pope Francis, who said to us that our thoughts on revitalizing the tools of nonviolence, and active nonviolence in particular, will be much needed and a positive contribution to the Church. I think over the years since 2016, we've come to understand that the actual process that we're involved in, both with the Vatican and at grassroots level in the Pax Christi movement, that process is valuable in itself, a process of dialogue and conversations and research with the Vatican, but with the wider peace community. And that this is supporting the way in which Pax Christi as a movement is understanding and approaching the value of nonviolent peacemaking. I've been on the executive team since the beginning, and since 2016, we've been working to develop strategies and resources to kind of grow the project. So this is a great opportunity to report on that kind of 4 years of life and work of the project. And what we'd like you to think about as we're going through this process tonight is to use this time together, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, the images, the resources we talk about, the videos you see, as potential tools and resources for you to use as well, to support you in your own work and your own understanding, honing your own understanding of the power of nonviolence to transform and change our world. As a former teacher and someone who's been through these processes of work for change in the Church, I'm very strong on the idea of starting from experiences. And we've all got our own peace heroes and heroines. And stories are often the starting point, the things that grip us and bring us into our concern for action, our concern for change. And I just grabbed 3 that have stayed with me. I was really taken by that story a couple of years ago of the Kenyan Muslims who shielded their Christian neighbors by their reaching out, by their empathy, by their desire to protect, and by their creativity. They did something in the moment that offered a way out. I've also been very moved and challenged by the bravery and the focus of Berta Caceres and her work against the violence that's being done to Indigenous people, and her persistent campaigning and advocacy challenging the hydroelectric dam, all of which sadly caused her to be assassinated. And then how many of you have been inspired by the moms on the street in the last week in Chicago and in Portland the mums, the women coming out and providing a human barrier between the Black Lives Matter protesters and the federal police. That forming that human shield, that human barriers, caused me a lot of food for thought about the way we can use our own physical presence as a tool for non-violence. And I'm going to hand over now to Aisling, and we're going to hear three different, very distinct stories from the Pax Christi movement as to how Pax Christi sections understand and act out of non-violence. So Aisling, we'll pass over to you.
Thank you. So for Pax Christi Miriam College in the Philippines, non-violence means speaking truth to power. Students like Nika demand their leaders hold fast to a decades-old agreement granting Muslims in Mindanao greater autonomy, and they forge a path of peace for victims of historical injustice. Non-violence in Germany encourages Pax Christi Germany to be creative with its campaign for crying out loud, stop the arms trade. With the weapons in bold colours and striking imagery, members took to the streets in red clothes to symbolise the bloodshed caused by German-made weapons traded around the world. The balloons with the image of the knotted gun are a reminder that they and other Pax Christi sections around the world demand that their governments stop the trade and export of weapons and turn to diplomacy to settle disputes. Inter-ethnic and patricidal wars have plagued the territory of Uvira in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Pax Christi Uvira is helping to build peace through school programs that promote human rights, teach democratic culture, and train young people in active non-violence. They are reaching across ethnic boundaries, trying to practice inter-ethnic reconciliation to replace a culture of violence with a culture of peace. This work is also carried out in refugee camps between Burundian and Congolese children.
And closer to home, we've been asking our own members to start reflecting and putting into their own words what non-violence means to them and what to them is the power of non-violence. So first of all, we're going to hear from a Pax Christi member, Carol Burns.
I think non-violence and being a non-violent person is a way of life. It has to be about making choices each time about how we deal with different situations, and always looking for the way that will be the most loving, yet not, it includes challenging and it includes accepting conflict, but it's a way of dealing with conflict that means that everyone feels eventually that they've had a say and they've been listened to, and hopefully in the end that there's some resolution. I think there's an absolute power and value to non-violence because it's about relationships. It's about relationships with individuals and with people, and that's what changes things. And unless we can build those caring and listening and loving relationships, then nothing will change.
And our second voice comes from Kate Monkhouse, who's a friend of Pax Christi, and Kate runs a women's peace organisation here in England.
Non-violence means for me trying my best to not live out of a place of fear and to try to refuse living with cultural or physical or structural violence wherever that might be in my own life or in society, and helping others to do the same. So the power for me of trying to live in a non-violent way means that instead of living out of fear, I can live out of joy, and it means that I can live with a certain level of freedom because I'm not subjecting myself to living within that violence, and so it means my actions have a generosity and a freedom to them, and then hopefully that enables me to accompany others who perhaps don't have that choice and who have to live with violence in their own lives, and it means that I'm free to be alongside them and to work for both of our freedoms as well.
So already we're seeing this spectrum of definitions of what non-violence means, and I find it healthier and more organic to hear people speaking about their experiences of non-violence than to try and spend hours defining it academically. So I think that's a good starting place for us in Pax Christi, asking this question, what does non-violence mean to you? And you'll all have a chance to give us your answer to that a bit later on. But now let's just move back a little bit to the project itself, the Non-Violence Project. And I just wanted to capture here very quickly some of the things that we have done here in England and Wales around the project. You'll all remember the first fruit of the project, our first achievement, was to have as the theme for the 27 World Peace Day, non-violence, a style of politics for peace. And that provided us in this country with a great opportunity to begin unrolling our ideas about this theme with the church in England and Wales through Peace Sunday. We also brought over Marie Dennis and Marie Stephan, two of our key partners and experts in the field of non-violence, for a series of seminars. And we held those at universities in Liverpool, in Birmingham, and in Leeds. And that was a way of trying to engage with a more academic community, with students and young people. Some of you will have been in the workshops that we've offered around the country, workshops with religious communities, workshop with Justice and Peace Commissions, with Pax Christi members, at the NJPN conference. And then in Scotland, we were invited to offer a number of conferences with Justice and Peace and with ecumenical groups in Scotland. So we found very creative ways of beginning to communicate this message with other faith traditions, with other communities, with other groups. Then as a section, we have a lot of skills among our members. And for the last couple of years, we've actually invited Pax Christi members to offer peace and non-violence reflections on the post-Easter stories, the Sunday readings. And that's provided a rich source of reflection that's come from the grassroots, from our own members. We've also been busy promoting a key publication, Choosing Peace, and a study guide was developed by Teresa for people to use in reading that book. And Choosing Peace brought together the fruits of the conference that we held in Rome. And we've also celebrated for a number of years the International Day of Non-Violence in October, and we'll be coming back to that a little bit later on. So we've been doing quite a lot already here in England and Wales and trying to unfold this project for our community here. Internationally, there's been great cooperation between Pax Christi International partners and the Vatican. And these are some of the themes and work areas that we've been developing since 2016. And these are all areas of work that have brought together people from around the globe to bring their active experiences of violence to these conversations, but to bring their insights, their knowledge, their theological background, their peacemaking background to the way we do theology and to how we approach advocacy and to how we communicate with the hierarchy and our bishops and to how we begin to weave this project of non-violence into the life of the church at all levels. And the one that I've been most closely involved in is this one here, the people of God, the grassroots engagement in the ways in which we can learn from experience and use the breadth that's present very much in our Pax Christi family to serve the way we understand non-violence. What are we offering now? So what have we been working to develop in the last couple of months? Well, one thing, a new tool we have, is the appeal to Pope Francis. You'll realise, I'm sure a lot of you, that there have been some key changes taking place in our world in recent years. And two of those have very much impacted on the way in which we've approached our work in nonviolence. One is the development of Laudato Si and what that offers the church and the challenges that that brings with it. And the other is the COVID experience. And both of these, in a way, are helping to expose the structural violence that is present in our world today, that's impacting on communities and impacting on our earth. And they provided a challenge for us in the nonviolence movement. And we believe that nonviolence and the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative and approach is going to offer a way forward for what we want to come out of this COVID experience, for how we can best live up to the demands and challenges of Laudato Si, how we can learn from the systems that destroy and dehumanize and create different kinds of cultures. So we tried to convey this to the Vatican and to Pope Francis in a very simple appeal. And this appeal has now gone public. We're asking people to sign it. We're asking people to endorse it. And it's also an appeal that recognizes the vision and the hope that Pope Francis is giving all of us in this work for peace and non-violence and care of creation. So this is one of the tools that we've newly created for all of you to use, to sign, to reflect on. And we hope, we've got over 3,000 signatures. We hope to gather more before we present it to Francis. We have a new publication coming out, Advancing Nonviolence and Just Peace. And this draws together the work of some of those projects I mentioned earlier, the work that's looking at how we develop theology, spirituality, the way in which the church can be challenged to weave nonviolence into its seminaries, its catechesis, and also to learn from the power of nonviolence from the grassroots up. And this book will be available, we hope, from the middle of August. And to me, it's really important because it's offering the voices of many who've been involved in this process, bringing those voices together. One of those was a young Kenyan woman called Kanini, who's worked on our People of God group. And she coined a beautiful phrase that I think is very helpful in picturing nonviolence. She said, nonviolence is the crop that can feed the world, but the farmer must know her soil. So if we see nonviolence as a living thing, a living crop, we have to find ways of planting it. We have to find ways of watering it, of caring for it, of harvesting it. And we see this book as a tool that will help us do all of things and give it life and bring it to life in our communities. And the third thing we've been offering and will be offering to you is a new resource that is a 5-session study guide, discussion guide that comes from the People of God Working Group. And it's using as its basis the World Peace Message of 2017, Nonviolence, a Style of Politics for Peace, which I think has been very underexplored in our church. So we see that as a great tool. And we're using that to explore these 5 themes: how we cultivate nonviolence, how we see nonviolence in our world, looking at the nonviolent Jesus and what he brings to our discernment and how we begin to act out of nonviolence. The power of nonviolence to bring about change. It is a force more powerful, but it's up to us to articulate that. And then an invitation to take up nonviolence wherever we are. And at the end of this session, we'll be giving you some dates when we hope to pilot this and give our Pax Christi members and supporters a chance to come on board and go through a taster of this new resource. But before we go on to look at any more resources, I wanted to give voice to another one of our partners in this Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. Pietro is from Mexico, and he works as a university lecturer. He works in setting up SERPAJ, a peace and justice group in Mexico, but he's also a deeply rooted grassroots peacemaker. He's been accompanying families in Mexico who've had children destroyed and disappeared, helping them to find those children. He's been working with families who've had their lives destroyed by gang violence. So he's very much rooted in the practice of nonviolence, as well as the spirituality and theory. One of his phrases that he's used again and again, I'm very attracted by, is the way he talks about the moral reserve of the church, the moral reserve of the church in relation to violence and non-violence. So I'm just going to give him a chance to relate that to us now.
In my Spanglish, I would like to share you something about this deep experience that we've been having for the last 3 years in the Nonviolent Catholic Initiative, a group from all parts of the world of people that share the Christian faith and a commitment in war and peace-building zones. And I think it has been a way of trying to recuperate the prophetical root of our church. It's very important to search this way that the church and also other churches can speak to the world and say, not more with just war, we need just peace, just dignity. We need a kind of peace that it's not the same as security, that it's the big trap we have in Mexico and in many other countries of Latin America and the world, that they have convinced a lot of people that we only need security even if we don't have any human rights and justice and social justice. That's a very big lie that justifies the big business of militarization, of terror, of the war spiral. So I've been enjoying this initiative and learning very much and sharing with all parts of the world, because we need that this moral reserve that has been the Catholic and other churches, Christian and not Christian, in the world and in history, recuperate this force, moral force, as moral reserve of societies, and say stop to power and say stop to all kind of economical and war interests, and be close to grassroots people that are searching real peace with justice. In this sense, in non-violence, their moral reserve is a very strategical non-violent weapon. And also, especially, hierarchy of churches that have a social force in society that must be used to stop all kind of injustice. And we know that power changes his actions when they see this moral force in the street, this moral force in actions that have to do with non-cooperation and civil disobedience also, because non-violent actions must be in proportion with violent actions. And violence in, for example, Mexico is very high. So we can't stop that only with marches and meetings. We must try with other kind of actions. And in this sense, an encyclical is a very real moral weapon, non-violent, that we can use for showing how church and his hierarchy also, because grassroots are always there, is in the part of peace and justice. So let's be together and struggle for a more prophetical and clear church in just peace. Thank you. Goodbye.
Pat, you're muted.
Right. Good to have another voice and another perspective of someone who's been through the whole process with us. So there's been a lot of listening. So now we're going to give a chance, we're going to break you into groups, and we'd like you to reflect on these two questions. What's encouraged you in what you've heard so far this afternoon? What's encouraged you? And then begin to think and put into your own words, how do you see non-violence? And what is its power for you? How do you see non-violence? What's its power for you? And because we've got such a lovely mixed international gathering, I hope people will be well mixed up. And we'll give you about 15 minutes in groups to have some discussion around these two questions here. Okay, Teresa, over to you or the team.
Well, please God, by just sitting in your chair, you'll find yourself in a smaller set of people in a moment when I open the breakout rooms. There's going to be between 4 and 6 people in each room. If people have joined in the last minute or two, or if your internet went down and you had to rejoin, it may be that you find you're not in a room. Just stay where you are and I'll come and move you into a room then, okay? So all you have to do is stay there, but I think you might need to click on a sign that says join the breakout room ?
Hello. Hello, everybody. Hello. I think everyone is muted.
Yes, you need to unmute. Numbers creeping up, Pat, so I think in a moment we'll all be here.
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope that worked for everyone and no one was sitting on their own in a strange space. Pat, I think everyone is back with us now. I'm going to hand back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I hope that was a good discussion, and you'll have a chance to share how you see non-violence, what your own definition or meaning of non-violence is at the end of our session together, when we'll capture some of these as photographs. I'm now going to go on and talk about a few more of the opportunities that are going to be ahead of us from August through to the end of the year, and give you a chance to see where you may be able to plug into these, what might be particularly inspiring or of interest to you, what you might want to share with others. And the first is that from September the 21st right through to the 2nd of October, we're launching what we're calling Catholic Non-Violence Days of Action, something that links the International Day of Peace with the International Day of Non-Violence, Gandhi's birthday, with the idea that we don't expect people to be doing something every day during that time, but the idea being that this time might be used for people to develop partnerships with other peace groups, with other faith groups, work in their churches, with women's groups, youth groups, to be as creative as possible, and to just explore ways that we can study and pray and act together to celebrate the power of non-violence. And for those of you who are part of the Catholic Environment Group, we have been in good conversations with the people who are developing the Season of Creation that runs from the 1st of September. And we see these two things as being complementary to one another, and things that will actually, each will enhance the work of the other if we find ways of collaborating. So 21st of September through to the 2nd of October, internationally, let's find ways of celebrating non-violence and giving it some kind of meaning, and hopefully come together or have solidarity actions on the 2nd of October, Gandhi's birthday, where we may have liturgies or times of commitment in common with one another. So we'll be producing liturgy material, we produce the Prayer of Nonviolence as a common resource that could be used around the globe on the 2nd of October. But to help support this, to give you lots of ideas and tools, we've also created a whole kind of framework, a go-to place for resources. And these will be available on our own website and on the CNI website. And the idea is that we've offered ideas under themes of prayer resources, ideas for public witness, doing things out in the street, ideas for exploring non-violence as a way of life, personally and in communities, ways of looking at a parish as a non-violent community, creating a non-violent parish, and ways of celebrating non-violence through the heroes and heroines in our own community and beyond that. So this is a great, what I think is a kind of pick and mix resource and model that will recognize that everybody's coming from a different context. Everybody's got different levels of time to give to this. So we're not limiting or having expectations. We recognize that this will be what people can manage to do in their own time. So some, for example, might decide to offer the 5-session course during that period of time. Others might decide that they want to do a walking pilgrimage that links together places of violence in their own community and offers some kind of prayer at those places. For others, it might be using some of the great film clips we've got here of non-violence in action from many parts of the world. For others, it may be, let's just sit around and have a storytelling session and share the stories in our own community and of our own heroes and heroines that inspire us and give meaning and direction to what non-violence looks like. And all this can be at sort of local level and national level and internationally, pulling in the resources and the richness of Pax Christi as an international movement. So these are the framework, ideas and actions that will link in to this Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action. And we're hoping that this will become an annual event, that we will slowly begin to unfold it this year, learn from experiences, and then every year in the future, find a way of marking these days and celebrating non-violence in our communities in ways that are most appropriate to help deepen our understanding of non-violence and move us into action. One of the strands of that strategy and that framework is advocacy. And we're now going to hand over to Joan Sharples, who's on the Pax Christi Executive, and she's on the International Advocacy Working Group, because we see advocacy and the work that we're already doing on disarmament, Israel-Palestine, peace education work, as an integral part to this framework of celebrating non-violence. So Joan, can we hear a little bit from you about how you see advocacy tying into this work?
The Catholic Nonviolence Initiative is seeking to permeate our lives with nonviolence at many levels, from the personal to the national and global. The advocacy group is concerned with encouraging organisations to a deeper understanding of nonviolence. We want national governments and international governmental institutions and the Church to change their thinking and their acting, to find other ways of dealing with peace and security issues, not just the usual violence and threats of violence. The advocacy group has spent a lot of time this year discussing what we should focus on, who we should be addressing with our advocacy, what we should be asking them to do, and who we might work with. Not easy, as contexts differ. Two good examples we've considered in the group are unarmed civilian protection, the sort of accompaniment the ecumenical accompanists do in Israel-Palestine, and work around the International Labour Organization Resolution 169 on the rights of Indigenous peoples whose lives are being adversely affected by the extractive countries in Latin America. The resolution is fine on paper, but people need to know about it, and Pax Christi member organisations are making sure that they do. The advocacy group hopes to encourage the church towards disinvestment in arms trade and production and in the extractive industries. And Pax Christi England and Wales has been doing just that through its involvement with the interfaith group that recently produced Banks, Pensions and Nuclear Weapons, Investing in Change. It is likely that the sharing of experience and ideas within the group will start to crystallise into a resource booklet as we move into the autumn and the next part of the process.
Thanks, Joan, for giving us a flavour of what the international group's doing, but also reminding us of the way we're already involved in at different levels in advocacy work here in England and Wales. And I think the advocacy group is an example of how Pax Christi works best. National sections bring their experience to the international table, and the international level has the capacity to work with international institutions, UN, European Union, and take those issues forward. So this marrying of the local, the national, and the international around advocacy is really important, and it was good to hear about that. So just kind of pulling some of this together, what's the timeline for you to look at for your own planning, I hope? So we're hoping that July and early August, we've got the launch of this new publication, Advancing Nonviolence. And it will be available to order from our website and from the international website from that time. And we hope it'll be another useful resource filling in some of the work that's been happening over the last 3 years. From the 20th of August for 5 weeks, we're going to be offering a taster of that 5-session study guide. We're going to be running it for 5 weeks for anyone who wants to come on board. And we'll offer it, I think, on a Thursday morning for 5 weeks. I'm going to offer the first 2, and then Joan will offer one, Aisling will offer one, Teresa will offer one, and we'll use it as a pilot. But there's a catch, and the catch is that we hope those who come on board and do the taster course with us will then feel able to run their own course in their family, with the group, with the community, maybe during Advent or even during the days of non-violence. So that's August and early September. We're also going to dedicate the next issue of our newsletter, Just Peace, will be dedicated to all these new resources and new approaches. So you'll read more about it there. Then we come back to the days of non-violence, 21st of September to the 2nd of October, to start thinking about what might be possible. Advent, we're suggesting you could run that course, that 5-unit course of making active non-violence a way of life. Wherever you are, whatever capacity you have at that time, think about using that resource. And all of this, we hope, will be feeding into the next World Peace Day message. We don't know what the message is going to be. Behind the scenes, Catholic Nonviolence Initiative has offered a proposal to the Vatican. It has offered a short paper about what the theme might be. It would be wonderful if they took that up because it's around non-violence, but we don't know. But I think our challenge will be when the World Peace message does come and when we celebrate it here on the 17th of January in England and Wales, will be to see how we can weave some of these ideas, resources, approaches, about growing nonviolence into how we mark World Peace Day in 2021. So they're just some of the things that take us up to the new year. Of course, we realise we might all be still locked down. We might be doing this kind of event more frequently. And I think, if I'm right, Teresa, nod or shake your head, we are also going to look at the possibility of offering some training around using Zoom for Zoom meetings, so that if you find, come September or Advent, you can't get out and sit in a room with other people, then you could actually run the course as we're going to run it, as a Zoom kind of teach-in and discussion. So we'll try and facilitate for that as well. So that's the kind of mapping out of where we've moved since 2016 and some of the newly developed approaches and resources that are just coming out now into fruition. With all of this, whether you're Pax Christi England and Wales, or Pax Christi Scotland, or Pax Christi France, or Germany, or Palestine, what we would really love is to get feedback from you. We know from experience that people often do things and we never hear about it. And that's a great sadness, because we learn from what you do. So if you're able to do any of this work, if you can experiment with doing something, running a group, a liturgy, a peace walk, a storytelling session, setting up an Instagram account with wonderful images of nonviolence, let us know, or let your section know, or let the CNI know, so that we can use those experiences and build on them and make them resources that we can share with other people. As I said right at the beginning, our first aim when we started this in 2016 was to get an encyclical. But we've learned since then that this process and what we're developing and what we're learning and what people are bringing to the conversation is of equal value to what we may end up with. And we're walking the path and creating the teaching as we go along. So we're now going to, I just also meant to say, if people wanted to put questions or queries, pop them in the chat box, and we will have a look at these after the session, and we will try and get back to people. But put your questions, queries in that chat box, and we'll have a look at them a little bit later on. We're now just going to sit back and have a little bit more of a reflective time, and just use this time to maybe pull together in your own mind the things you've been hearing and looking at. And I'm going to invite Foster and Rachel from the Pax Christi team to lead us through a little reflection and then a final prayer that Foster will say, but I hope we will all pray it together wherever we happen to be. If Foster and Rachel are ready.
So what is nonviolence?
It is a strategy for social change that rejects violence.
It is a philosophy of active peacemaking.
It is a spiritual discipline.
It is a pragmatic choice based on what works.
It is an active response to violence.
It is a force more powerful than violence. How do Christians walk the talk of nonviolence in everyday life?
By working for justice.
By trusting in God rather than trusting in weapons.
By practicing creative and disarming ways of responding to a crisis.
By actively and publicly resisting war.
By building relationships with those who were supposed to be enemies.
By showing more love.
And Foster will lead us in the prayer in a moment, but the image we're using on the prayer will be familiar to some of you. It's the image of the Black Christ in the church in Alabama, the church that was destroyed by a firebomb in the 1960s. And I think as we look at that image and hear the prayer, we will also be thinking of the life of John Lewis, whose funeral is taking place today, who was a great prophet and practitioner of nonviolence himself.
How I wish that all men and women of goodwill would look at the cross, if only for a moment. There we can see God's reply. Violence is not answered with violence. Death is not answered with the language of death. In the silence of the cross, the uproars of weapons ceases, and the language of reconciliation, forgiveness, dialogue, and peace is spoken.